This is not going to be a typical panel, or at least we hope it's not going to be. Can we speak totally honestly and bluntly in this room? Are we in a circle of trust right now? That's what I need to know. Yeah. Off the record. This is a blanket off the record statement.
Cone of silence.
Cone of silence, yes, thank you. So Mark and I co-curated the track this year, and we talked about doing a distribution panel. And originally we said, all right, well, let's do what we do, right? We're going to get some platform providers and talk about what they're learning from their audience insights and move on to the next panel. But then we had this nagging concern that was, but really what we're all talking about in the hallway is what happened to STEAM education? What happened to Amplify? What happened to Glass Lab? What happened to Apple's efforts in education? What happened to we, and again, circle of trust here. We all joke about where all the dead bodies are buried, right, in terms of distribution for learning games. And full disclosure, Mark and I have been actively trying to solve this problem in a couple of different ways over the course of the past 2 years, I'll say. Every time we feel like we're making some progress, we find out we haven't come as far as we'd hoped. Sometimes I use the term soul crushing to describe the process. But we still feel like this is a problem worth talking about, right? And there are some folks in this space, some folks with relevant experience who can help to inform this conversation. Jane Robinson from First Book, Ted Brodheim from Samsung are going to give us those perspectives. So the goal for today is to just try to have an honest discussion about this topic, okay? It is not going to be sanitized. So Mark and I are going to try to provide a little bit of the lay of the land, and then Jane and Ted are going to talk about their experiences as platform providers, and then we're hoping that gives us plenty of time to have a very lively and provocative discussion with this group. So all opinions welcome. Is that good? Is that fair? Perfect. Okay. All right, so first and I have to be able to see this. So first, let me just set up just a little bit of the lay of the land here. This is very basic. For those of you who've been trying to tackle this problem, you will already know this. But when we talk about platforms, we're talking about the kind of meat in the sandwich here, right? So if you think about products in general, those products might be games. They might be materials, like supplemental materials. They might be books, in the case of how First Book began. Might be digital learning tools. Noodle Markets also distributes services in K-12. It's all of those things, right? So that's the products bucket. The customer bucket, I'm going to go to the other piece of bread here. The customer bucket is also a very diverse bucket, right? We say customers, those are the people accessing these platforms, but we mean kids who are making their own decisions directly, depending on how old the kid is. We mean parents who are mediating a lot of those choices. We mean educators who are making decisions directly for groups of kids or students that they're guiding, whether that's after-school programs or in school, right? And we mean institutions. So we mean at a bigger level, at a scaled level, buyers who are making decisions for large groups of those programs and those students. In between those two pieces of bread would be the platforms. And when we say platforms, there's a wide range of things we're talking about there, right? That's any kind of service that is trying to connect the products to the customers. And on those platforms, they're doing lots of different kinds of things. There are platforms that are more directories, right? They don't do a lot of direct buying on the platform. You can't do a lot of direct buying on the platform. There are platforms that are real marketplaces, more like the Amazon type model. There are platforms that rely on subscriptions. So if they're in the K-12 business, you pay a subscription price, whether that's monthly or yearly or per student or per teacher, right? All those different kinds of models. And you're getting access to everything on that platform. There are membership-based models for platforms. So I think it's important just to start out, give us a little bit of context, that when we're generally talking about there are platforms that are connecting products and customers, there are practically an infinite number of possibilities here, right? Combinations. Now, the pain points that we talk about, angst over on a regular basis, would be sustainability and discoverability. So on gamesandlearning.org, we've been tracking this for 3 years, and we're talking to everybody at every stage in this equation. And over 3 years of research and investigative reporting, we consistently hear these two things as the industry problems. And as much as it's great to connect more researchers with more developers, and as much as it's great to improve PD for teachers, and all the things we've been talking about at this conference, which obviously we think are important, because otherwise we wouldn't program them, they are important. When it comes right down to it, these two things are what most of the people in industry feel that if we do not solve them, we're not going to get anywhere, right? So if we can't figure out a way to help the research-based developers to achieve sustainability, and just to give you one little nugget of what that looks like, right now, according to Forbes, 0.01% of all new apps are going to be financially sustainable. 0.01%. That's not a typo in any way. And of all the apps that are available, again, we're just talking about apps and there are other products, but just as a little case in point, almost 95% of them are free. So even if you're being downloaded, good chance is you're free. So how you achieve sustainability is a little bit of a challenge. And then the second piece here is discoverability, and we've heard this through some sessions over the past 2 days. We know from research that we conducted through the Joan Ganscuni Center and Games and Learning, 55% of parents, 60% of K-5 teachers wish it was easier to find better choices, right? And the language is a little different when you dig into that research. It's a little different in those two audiences, but the general idea is the same, right? Over half of the parents, over half of the teachers are saying, our biggest barrier is we don't know where to find the good stuff or the stuff that's going to fit our needs. The one other note I'll add to this before I hand it off to Mark is the other thing that we see is the problem of scale, right? So as Mark talks about the examples that he has, the bodies, as they are, the other issue is achieving scale, both in terms of content offerings and in terms of audience that is coming to find those content offerings. And so when we think about these buckets, when you look at products and customers in particular, think about that scale question, right? So when you think about the products that are being offered, are there enough products that cover enough categories across enough ages, right? Whoever you're trying to target, to make that an appealing destination. And in terms of scale for customers, is there enough of marketing or outreach or strategy behind that to bring enough kids, parents, educators? And I think when Mark goes through the examples, we might be able to detect where some things have fallen down in terms of one or the other. So Mark, do you want to? Okay, so Mark's gonna continue on this path of giving us a little bit of a lay of the land, and then Jane and Ted are going to give us good news.
That's what you thought.
You're out of here, Ted. And then we're going to go back to unvarnished truth.
Yeah, and conversation, hopefully, with all of you, not just us talking, which would be great. So for those of you I haven't met, my name is Mark DeLaura. I come from the game industry. I spent 5 years building platforms at Nintendo in the N64 era, 5 years doing platforms at Sony and PS2, PSP, PS3, and then I worked at the White House in 2013, 2014 on learning games and computer science education for K-12. And the last couple of years, I've been scheming with Michelle and trying to crack this nut. And I have a newsletter called Level Up, which I have not done nearly enough with lately. But thank you for that. So this is sort of a very rapid, haphazard set of slides that I put together when we realized that we needed to have a deeper conversation in this room. So what I hope is that this encourages some thoughts of your own and that we can then talk all about it. So platforms of distribution. So I think Michelle covered this pretty well. I think of it just simply as how does the developer get to the consumer, whether the consumer is an educator, a parent, student, district, superintendent, whoever. How do they find the material? How do they purchase it? What's the business model? How does the revenue get back to the developer? What does that revenue look like? Is it a one-time buy? Are there free-to-play things involved? Maybe not for education. Is it a subscription? And how is that all made easier, that entire process all the way around? So good examples, of course, Apple App Store, Steam from Valve on the PC side, of course, Google Play. And then some of the online console stores like Xbox Live, Arcade, and things like that. So why do we need this? You probably already all know this, so I won't reread the bullet points. For me, the one of the most important reasons why we need a platform and some kind of distribution system that works is to encourage a sustainability flow. So there are lots of people who will make learning games and will do it for free. And they'll be of varying qualities. They then go out of business. Like, how does the developer who's interested in making an amazing learning game, who I want to see make 10 amazing learning games, make numbers 2 through 10? Because if they make one and then go out of business, then we're all at a loss. We've lost the next 9 fantastic things they could have done, right? So they need to be able to get enough sustainable revenue that they can then go and do that. I'm not talking about making people rich. I'm talking about how do we encourage the ecosystem to thrive and let people continue to make the things that they're passionate about to contribute to education. So that's what's important. And that's what a platform can provide, from tools that the platform provider creates, that then the cost of building those tools are amortized across all of the developers instead of everybody having to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to write my own analytics system. I'm going to write my own assessment engine. No. To the billing flow, which is it's kind of a non-trivial problem for anybody who wants to sell something not either on the App Store or Google Play. If you have to try to figure out how to take orders via Visa, you're going to not enjoy your life for a couple of months. And I'd rather have you focusing on making a great learning game than trying to figure out how to work with Visa. Thank you, Visa, but Yeah, POs. Oh yeah, POs. Even more fun. So obviously, I'm not the first one to say this. There have been people who have tried this. There have been efforts that have been successful, less successful, not successful. So back in, was this 2004 maybe? It's been a while. There was a Steam for Schools push. So Valve Steam, they decided they were going to try to address the education market. They started building, this is just a screenshot of the Teach with Portal site, because teaching physics with the game Portal was one of their premier efforts to help drive this whole thing. And the small text underneath the frequently asked questions in the giant 05 here says, the expansion of this educational program is currently on hold. Steam for Schools is no longer available for download. So, and that's what happened. I think it was over the course of somewhere between 2 and 4 years, I forget. And Valve just pretty much lost interest and kind of pulled the plug and walked the other direction and are not focusing on education at all now, which is sad. You can admittedly go onto Steam and you can upload the game that you want to sell, if it's an educational game, onto their platform, no problem. The number of educators you're going to find who have Steam installed at their school and purchasing authority to use it is probably pretty small. I'm not sure I'd recommend that course. So another example, and this is a little not quite a direct hit in terms of a comparison, but Amplify was a $500 million effort to create a vast learning ecosystem from a custom wireless tablet to a suite of 30 learning games that were funded, which is pretty amazing. And curriculum, games, assessment, services. It was a huge, big effort led by Rupert Murdoch's corporation. And have any of you used it? So, bingo. So it's pretty much came apart. I mean, it's a big, complicated effort, and they did a bunch of great things, and you get drugged down by the few things that you don't do that are great when you try to do 12 things at the same time, which is a story I'll tell again on the next slide. But the good news is the games group rolled out, and so Amplify Games, some of those great games are going up on the Apple App Store, and you can pull them down and play them. One of them, 12 a Dozen, is one that I particularly like. And I hear that there's an ongoing life for this company, that there's going to be more announcements in the future. So hopefully these games, which were pretty great, will see the light of day. But as a system where you as a developer could have engaged with Amplify and gotten your game distributed on this new wireless tablet, not happening, no tablet, no distribution system. Number 3, and I have to say Erin Hoffman is in the audience over here, who was a Glass Lab person and just gave a talk on Glass Lab. So she's the expert, and I will defer to her in any conversation. But Glass Lab was another huge effort, and I want to say it was an industry-wide effort. Funded $5 million from Gates Foundation, $5 million from MacArthur Foundation. This was 5 years ago. A whole bunch of other partners, including some AAA developers like EA, And the idea was, this is glass games, learning, and assessment. So can I use, starting out with AAA games like SimCity, how do I use that game to teach in the classroom and provably educate students about something? So that's the assessment part. So they were basically biting off, build games, build a distribution system, build a teacher network so I can get those games to the teachers, build an analytics system so that I can track whether, like, the data from those games. Now build an assessment engine so that I can analyze that information from the analytics, and a teacher dashboard so that I can then communicate that back to the teachers. So 10 million, you could do that maybe, right? 10 million, no, you can't do that with 10 million. They did a lot of great work, and I think some of the things that I really like that came out of that were, the assessment engine is super interesting, the SimCity ED effort, super interesting, teacher network, interesting. The research, I think, is the one thing that's going to live on the longest, because for me, the research that was accomplished during that time period is what I point to anytime I talk to any funder, any educator now, and it says, you can use games in a classroom to augment a curriculum, and you will get a 12% increase in cognitive learning outcomes as an auxiliary modality to use. Like, that's what I need. Like, that's the ammo I need when I go talk to policymakers, especially. This is just a slide of some of the things that they built, which I just said out loud, and some of the games. So they had built some of their own games that also, since they had to build out this distribution system and network, they had a bunch of third-party games on there. So you could approach GlassLab, integrate the technology that they had built, and then ship your game on their platform and get revenue from their subscription system. I think I left out the they're pretty much out of business part. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And then there's that. Yeah. Yeah. So actually you can't do that now with your games because they're not accepting new games and it's getting ramped down. So why do we need to do this? You know, aren't there distribution systems out there? What about the App Store? Like, everybody uses that, right? I think, well, this is a little bit of a small slide, but for me, the middle column here kind of tells the tale of why you don't want to do that. If you're trying to get educational games out there and they're intended to be teaching experiences, learning experiences for the classroom, you don't want to be going up competing against 8 Tokaboka games. Probably it's going to be hard to find your stuff. And even, yeah, We're getting Tokaboka is having sustainability challenges too. So this is not just, you know, like rigorous education games, but everybody in this space is having problems. So just finding the material, there's so much great stuff on the App Store, and you're just going to get buried unless you can find some way to compete with that. Competing with that probably means marketing dollars. You're probably a struggling learning games company. You probably don't have marketing dollars to compete with, you know, Madden 2017. Challenge. I also want to say that the world has changed, like we talked about. We thought when Steam for Schools came out and it was a native PC thing that that was a great idea. It's not a great idea now. 58% of hardware sales last year in the US, Chromebooks. Don't try to do a distribution system that's a PC native thing. Do it in HTML5. Do it for Chromebooks. Do it for browsers. That way you can get to everybody. And if you doubt the capabilities of Chromebooks, this little video is somehow attempt to fast forward and fail. Oh, I sure wish I could fast forward this. That would be way better. You know what? I'm going to keep talking, and then as we transition, I'll put this lovely video up, and you can watch it while we're still talking, because there's a minute of loading of this. And then we'll move on from there. Because I just want to close out on, you know, why is it that we need this? What is it that we need? This is a conversation we should be having. We could, as an industry, set up a distribution system and find some way to like put it as a nonprofit, all funded in some way, take slices of revenue, well, Steam does this. Steam, 30% of your revenue for games on Steam go back to Valve. What if we had a nonprofit and 10% of your revenue went to that, support that nonprofit and help them build out shared tools? What would those shared tools be? That's something we should all argue about. Do you need an authentication system when there are LMSs out there that have authentication, or you can use clever badges or something like that? I don't know. Do you need an analytics system when you can use, you know, stuff that Facebook has built? You can use PlayFab or one of any number of analytics kits. Same with assessment, same with all of these things. Do we just do alliances with them and then find ways to adapt it to what we need? Maybe that's easier, maybe not. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is really reduce risk all the way around, increase discoverability, and provide tools. And that, we think that that will propel the industry forward. We need that, definitely. OK, so I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to turn it back to you, and then I'm going to play a pretty little video, and you can watch it as it goes.
Thanks, Mark. Well, actually, so should we watch the video and then shift to Jane, or do we want, because you're going to have to switch your, it's going to take a minute?
Right. Yeah, it just takes a little while to load. So I'm going to describe what this is just so you know. The reason I'm showing this is that a lot of people, when I say we need to do educational stuff on Chromebooks, they think of like old janky HTML5 web pages that are ugly, and why would you think about making a learning game for that? And I get that. I'm a geek. I'm a tech guy. Like, I want my games to look like games, right? So what this is this is new tech that was mostly developed by Mozilla, the Firefox people, but in collaboration with Chrome, in collaboration with Edge and Internet Explorer, to port high-fidelity graphics and games to web browsers. So this is on my cheap $200 Chromebook that I bought in early 2016, loading up a game that uses the Unreal Engine 4 game engine, which is the highest fidelity, most gorgeous game engine out there. And I just loaded this up off a random web page to see if it would work. And it works, and it runs at 30 frames a second, and it's beautiful. I'm going to put it in full screen here in a second. So this is called their Zen Garden Demo. So they use this to show off technology on the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One. So they, kind of as an experiment, just ported it over to the browser to see what would happen. This is what happens. This is not a movie. You'll see in a second that I'll put in an interactive mode and I'll click around on things. This Chromebook cost me $200. It was like this generic Chromebook that I bought. And it looks beautiful. So if you think you can't make gorgeous learning games that run on Chromebooks or in browsers, that's changing. The real question is, how do you make them and then sell them and sustain yourself while doing it? But this tech now exists, so one box checked. Now let's move on to the other problems. All right, I'll stop there.
Our anxiety levels have risen. And before we send you off to lunch, play it again. It's gonna be okay. I'm just speaking for myself. Yeah. Take a deep breath. So as we're switching back, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
So Jane Robinson, Jane tells me she doesn't like titles, and I think that's because Jane is first book. Jane and Kyle Zimmer are first book. And Jane's going to tell us about some of her lessons learned from 25 years of first book as a platform.
Yes, yes. I'm just going to mellow up here to the lectern. Yep, so we are, oops, how do I make that happen? I just do this, I think. Look. So we are first book. That's not Facebook. Everybody slips on that and calls us Facebook. First book was founded, though, in 1992. Can everyone raise your hands if you were born after 1992? Yeah, I'm just gonna kill myself. So I'm not gonna get through this. I'm just not gonna get through it. It was founded to solve the problem of educational equity, and it started, as the name indicates, with books. But we've vastly moved past that. So what we do is address the lack of educational equity through a supply chain that gets exactly the most needed, highest quality books, educational materials, basic needs, everything in the way of an educator who is serving children in need, and supply them in an affordable way. The people we serve are this network of educators serving children in need. There are now 31 million children, 43% of US kids. So this market is huge, and this market has a margin of profit in it. This is everything we serve. Hard, soft, digital content, basic needs, the works. The way it becomes permanent, this supply chain will be through, and already is in the last 9 years, we launched the First Book Marketplace, and it'll be self-sustaining at scale. This is a revenue-generating e-commerce model, and will serve as a way for every vendor, content creator, publisher, to make a sustainable profit through the marketplace. So the model, First Book Marketplace, we have aggregated this network of educators. We have aggregated basically the supply to the educators, and as Michelle described in her sandwich, we've got the platform in the middle. The other angle on this that has become increasingly obvious to us at First Book is the voice of the educators. We loop their information back to us so that we and the content creators know what they need. Our favorite little example of that is The Very Hungry Caterpillar, a book most people know about, very popular. Our network told us they needed it in bilingual. We went to the publishers and said, please may we buy your bilingual version? They said there isn't one. We said, well, how about if we bought 30,000 of them? Would there be a bilingual version then? And we talked to Eric Carl. Presto, we got a bilingual version of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. We went back to the publishers and ordered 100,000 of them. The publishers said, oops, there's profit in this, and they took it to the retail market. This has happened over and over at First Book with paper copies of soft cover of the Wimpy Kid series. People are finding where the profit is in this segment. The other thing we do is bundle resources with the content that's purchased, and we recruit purchasing power for the network. So some of the profit, some of the revenue is coming from the teachers themselves, or the school districts, or the preschool educators, but also we recruit purchasing power for them. Anything to make the formula work that the content creator, the publisher, the vendors make a margin in this. So this is a triple win, as you can see here. We don't believe there'll be any sustainability in this unless everyone benefits from this. The educators are getting what they need, they're making their budgets go further, or they're getting purchasing power from First Book to use on the First Book Marketplace. Every vendor, publisher, content creator makes their margin. It might be slim, but we do the marketing for them to this huge network. And there is a tiny margin in also for the First Book Marketplace to keep this system going so that it is sustainable at scale. This is an ecosystem where everyone wins and there's no reason to bail out of it. But again, this huge learning has been in the network insights and data. We've created this loop with what is called in this part of the world, not the base of pyramid, but the bottom of the top of the pyramid. If you look at the economic universe, a huge pyramid, 2/3 of it is extreme poverty on the planet. The United States and Canada is the top of the pyramid, but the people at the bottom of that layer are in incredible predicament. They cannot purchase, they cannot afford supplies, and that is the vast 31 million children and their families that we're reaching out to serve. So this loop has become incredibly important. We have done preliminary surveys, focus groups. We're developing a research hub, basically, for gleaning all sorts of information, insights, data from that population. We worked with gamesandlearning.org. If you look at that link on this slide, you'll be able to see all the survey results, everything that was covered from what the content has to look like, its relevance, its affordability, and you'll see all the findings if you go to that. If you go to that link. Currently, we are designing a needs index, which is a visual compilation of public data sets mapped with our network mapped over it so that we know where the kids are, where the teachers are, what they need, what predicament they're in, and as well as First Book Insights that's in design right now. That'll likely be a subsidiary of First Book and a permanent research hub for this population. This is an example from the gamesandlearning.org project that we did. Just as an example, you'll find this on the link, this and many other graphs. So please do go look there. Our growth has been, I laugh, you know, they say, I mean, this is the hockey stick, you know, and that is what's happening. But 2016 is where the network was at 300,000, just to give you an example. At the end of 2016, it's at 125,000 now. 4,000 new educators are joining every month. We predict it'll be 500,000 by the end of fiscal year 2018. And we're looking for scaling funds to get the First Book marketplace up. If we get the scaling funding, we predict a 3 times growth within 3 years. As you can see, it's already growing 23%. That's the average annual rate. 2016, it was nearly $14 million. And our prediction is 3x in about 3 or 4 years. That is the end of my tale.
I know we only have a few minutes left. We can stay for another, 3 hours, 4 hours to talk about this. Ted's going to share with us some context from Samsung. Right, Ted?
Sure.
I think you're going in the
Am I
wrong
going
direction.
backwards?
Yeah. And then if you all can stay for a few minutes, we'll do some questions.
So my name's Ted Brodheim. I work for Samsung, was just mentioned. Thank you all for listening to me. I have the advantage that I've been on both sides of the equation. So I actually ran technology for New York City Public Schools for the bulk of the Bloomberg administration, where we started the iZone and brought a lot of education technology into the classroom, and has sort of become a little bit of a national model on that. I now work at Samsung, and I'll talk about what I do there in a few minutes. But in trying just to make sure that I focus this as much as I can, I'm going to come up with 3 imperfect categories. I'm going to ask you to try and slot yourself in that category, just so we know who the audience is a little bit. So when you came into this room, were you coming in primarily because you're a game developer or a manufacturer? Are you primarily an educator? Or you're primarily a consumer or maybe an investor or something like that? So how many people in the room are primarily game developers or game manufacturers? Okay, how many people are primarily educators? That's about half. And how many people are just sort of consumers or investors or? Okay, so got a handle. Okay, so about 50-50. Okay, so I'm going to try as much as I can to keep my comments sort of addressed at those 2 audiences, because like I said, I have been on both sides of it. So at Samsung, I work for the B2B side of the business. So what that means sort of in plain language is not the consumer side. So our customers are all aimed at large institutions, healthcare institutions, federal government, retail, education, as well as a whole bunch of additional verticals that we have out there. And when we think about education, we think about education very, very broadly. Most people hear education and think about K-12, but to me, it's much, much bigger than that. There's this whole piece around continuing ed, adult learning, corporate learning, and all those places. And there are phenomenal bright spots on this chart where there's been huge inroads in gaming technology and gaming education across all of these verticals. And I highlighted 4 of them up here, and there are another 6 or so additional ones on there. But in healthcare alone, we have seen a huge expansion of game-based technology across the board. And most people hear me say that, and they immediately leap to, oh, because you're training doctors and nurses how to do things. And it's not that at all. Most of it is aimed at patients. Most of it is aimed around anxiety prevention. It's helping patients understand how they're going to go through certain processes and procedures. It's for at-home use so things can be sustained as you go out into the community and move out of the institution. Just in terms of corporate wellness alone, anti-anxiety programs developed around VR is about a $10 million a year business right now. So as you think about what it means to be in education, think about it very broadly, whether it's federal government and training that we're doing there, retail, and traditional education. I focus this mostly around VR because I know VR is hot at the moment, but we've got similar slides around AR and just standard technology that we see growing on Chromebooks, which as mentioned earlier is really the big area going forward. Samsung themselves, what we really focus on is looking for partners who are on the software side, who we can work with and bring things to market where there's really a unique value to the customer going forward. The way we think about the platform, the way we think about how we bring things to market is a fairly simple model. We have a handful, and it's a fairly small number, it's a couple of hundred high-touch companies that we work with. These are very large educational institutions, be it higher ed or K through 12, government entities, corporations, and the like, that we work with very, very closely. Everything else that we deal with, we cover through a series of channel partners. And those channel partners really cover the entire US. And if you're going to think about developing these games, and you're going to think about going to market, you really need to understand who these players are, because these are the primary players that any institution, everything from your dry cleaner, all the way up to Fortune 100 companies, are buying most of these products through these resellers. And these resellers cover everything across the board. We basically run, we refer to channel partners and resellers, basically depending on the size of the business they've got. But this is how a company like Samsung, with a fairly small sales staff, manages to cover the entire country. There's always a lot of talk about K through 12, so I want to just touch on that for a moment. I've been on the K through 12 side. I understand it really well. It's really, really hard to get into it. It is primarily an RFP-driven business, which makes it very, very high barriers of entry. There are some limited pilot opportunities, but it's, in my experience, it's that 0.01% of the people that get those pilot opportunities that really are able to leverage that into a lot of growth. And K through 12 districts tend to be very, very risk adverse. So you need to be thinking about those items. I'm going to come out and talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Flip side of that is training for certification is much easier to get into, and there's a deep desire in those fields to look for innovative approaches. And corporate training is very, very open to innovation, but it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem there because they want to see proof points, and you don't have proof points yet, so you kind of got to work your way around that. So when we think about going to market, right, we actually think about bringing our products and our solutions out. You have to figure out where the trusted relationships exist. Who are they already going to listen to? They will generally look to their suppliers. They'll generally look to the channel partners. They'll generally look to the resellers. Who have you seen? What examples have you seen? Who do you like? Have you seen anything innovative? That's a much, much better way at getting at folks. I'm sorry if I'm going fast. I'm just trying to be mindful of the time. And there is a first mover challenge. There is that whole challenge you've got around going in first, What's the evaluation process going to look like? What do the companies want to see going forward? So last thoughts. Identifying the need is important. Identifying the buyer is just as important. I have seen phenomenally good technology, really, really great technology. I have seen people in school districts and higher ed throughout the whole country say, I desperately want this technology. And it goes absolutely nowhere because the developers thought about a need. They thought about that need very, very well. They created a product for that need, but they didn't think about the buyer. The person who actually wants it doesn't control budget, doesn't have the ability to actually execute on the purchase. Over and over again, I hear this complaint, we've got a great product. You have got a great product, but you have to figure out who can actually buy it. So make sure you don't lose sight of both sides of that question. Having an effective product is very important. If it's not effective, no one wants it. But so many effective products, the implementation is horrendous. And anyone who's ever tried to implement anything in a K-12 environment, and the educators in the room, I'm sure, will back me up on this, you have to think about how do you make this so a really good teacher with really good support can figure out how to make this work. And if it's too complicated, it's just not going to fly in the environment. And it's not going to fly in a K-12 environment. It's not going to fly in a corporate environment. Again, it's great that you have these studies that show how effective it is. If you can't run it, you can't run it. When I was in New York City, New York City has about 1,900 schools. We took 300 of them aside, and we ran programs in those 300 schools. So this was really a tremendous scale. And our question wasn't as much, did the software work? Because we know the software worked, but can it be implemented in the classroom and brought to scale? Most of them failed at that level. It wasn't they were effective. And last, just to try and end on a slightly humorous note, no matter what you think, nothing is foolproof. Fools are wildly ingenious. Okay? You've got to keep it simple. The more you complicate it, the harder it's going to be to implement going forward. Less is usually more when it comes to these situations. So I apologize for rushing through that. Hopefully gave you a little bit of insight, but I do know that we want to try and get through a handful of questions, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but if they're hard questions, you have to buy me beer. That's the only requirement.
Thank you, Ted. Okay, so we have maybe just a few minutes. Okay, so
yes, what I was going to say is that we are officially out of time, but this room is on lunch, and you should feel free to, if the panelists are willing, we'd love to have some questions and open up the discussion a little bit. If you need to move on, we will understand. So I will give this official talk. If you are leaving, please check out the Civics and Social Issues Salon on the 5th floor and the Plymeta Workshop across from here in Star Foundation Hall. So with that, I'll bring it back to you and questions.
Thank you. So can we start out, Ted uncovered for us the mix of developers and educators in the room. So of the developers in the room, are there strategies that you have found that solve some of these challenges that we were talking about? For educators in the room, have you found ways to get around this challenge of trying to find the best possible solution? And if you haven't, and you could design anything in the entire world, what would that be and what would that involve? What do we do? Yes, go, Mark. Pick on anyone you'd like.
That's not why I was calling you out.
There's money being exchanged in the front row. I don't know if you're seeing this, but
I'm sitting in the wrong row here.
everything is, it's all devolving. Good thing we're in the cone of silence, circle of trust.
Okay, we're all set now.
Okay, so first of all, so we've identified some challenges, some potential solutions. Do you see the same thing in terms of challenges and solutions? Have you figured out ways to get around some of these pain points that we've described? And if not, what should we do?
So as an educator, I'm the first one to be guilty of wanting everything for free. And I don't like to admit that, but it's true. However, the reality is it has to be sustainable, right? So one thing, and I'll just kind of cover a few bases but yesterday somebody asked that question in the VR panel about if games are funded, they should be offered for free. Well, if the funding is enough to afford for the company to make them free, I'm sure they'd be happy to do that. So where do we find that middle ground, and when does a company decide that there's value in giving something for free? Like you were talking about the teacher portals. I was very involved in that program, super excited about it. I'm sure there was some value to Valve in having that and inspiring kids, and they created some great aspects of the otherwise regular commercial game for education, and then they just abandoned the program. So I think that's the main point that we're seeing over and over and over. So do I have a solution? I wish I had a solution. And then I'll just say real quickly, you have a few, like there's Teacher Gaming, has a model that seems similar to what you were showing in Glass Lab, where you pay a per student price, and then you have access to the whole library, and it's actually affordable. So if there's profit sharing with the vendors, then I think you have a possible solution. You may have a number of commercial games and games with supporting materials. So and Minecraft has their $5 per seat license, which some people are balking at quite a bit, and then Games Store Mechanic offers like a $2 per student license for, and they allow that to be extended for a year. That's forever. So I think they see this value that if a teacher buys a gazillion accounts at $2 a piece, which they're happy to do. They love it if kids continue to use it. If not, they're still getting some revenue. So those are the things I've seen that have been somewhat effective.
Thank you.
Follow-up question to you on that. When you talk about free, are you talking about the software being free? Are you talking about the professional development being free? Are you talking about the ongoing maintenance? Are you talking about the installation? Like where does, because the word free gets thrown around a lot, but where does free begin and end? Because I agree with part of your statement that you can probably do the initial development of the game more or less for free or low cost, but then you get into the sustainability question. So from your perspective, where does free begin and end?
I believe that it doesn't have to or shouldn't have to be free. I think there's a value in that the educational system values. I think it's so weird, that whole thing. Like sometimes districts balk at PD expense, and sometimes they embrace and feel they have money for that. So that's one of those things, and I think there are a lot of companies that are, but again, who's doing the PD is the other question. Is it the company, and often not. So then are they seeing?
Do you want to jump in here? She says she's dying over here, so I want to make sure no one dies in this session. That's the low bar we've set.
That's still happening. I've been at this for cut, and I've seen the conversation shift. It's no longer the dominant conversation. It's no longer the game belongs to school. The conversation is now which games belong to school. How do we get them into school, and how do we get teachers excited about using them and seeing the connections to what they want their children to know be able to do. Because if you can show a teacher how this is going to make your job easier and give good outcomes, then they'll be helpful. But now professional development, do not tell your teachers to stay after school and consult them with something that's an interactive worksheet. It's just like putting in front of a kid who says, this game sucks. That it's better than worksheet. In my personal experience, I only use commercial off-the-shelf games in my room. I use only 4 games. I said 5. I did use World 2, and many others of the indie games in my home. But I had to do a whole lot of heavy lifting in order to make that work. I had to find a software program that would be my go-to system, which I used Dream Lab, because That's class lab, that's ethical assessment. That's the game, playing the game itself. The assessment is, and as you can see, I'm jumping all over the place because I'm so passionate about all this. I really think, we have to say, how are we going to tell teachers that his needs, you know, maybe you don't see it, but your students, this is what they're doing outside of school. And here's what you're doing, and you're wondering why half of them are, go ahead and slide up. Half of them are disengaged or disenfranchised. You know, there's the kids that know how to play school, they got a knack for science, and when they walk in my room on day one, it's a, where's my textbook? Where are my worksheets? I know how to do that. So I moved their team big time. And what I have to say is, textbook is right here. So I don't want to fall into the same trap of saying, no, this is the way to learn.
Right.
You know, so the teacher piece, you know, game designers always come to me and say, how do we get into districts? How do we get into schools? Do I go to the superintendent? Do I go to the teacher? You've got to get the students, the parents, the teachers, the principals, and the superintendents.
And we'll do it all for free. Do you have one?
When I've got a little more time, I usually start my presentation with a 15th century Italian Renaissance painting of a classroom. And it's got a teacher in the front and students in rows on the back, and 2 students are in the back talking, and 1 person's reading a book, and 2 students are sound asleep. So what you're describing is quite accurate, but it's not new. It's not new. We've been having this problem of what's appropriate in the classroom since about, this painting was done like, 1478 or something like that. So it's nothing new. It's nothing new.
I want to get.
I'm sorry.
I want to get one more.
Yeah,
Yeah. One more comment here.
So I'm from Quebec, and we started an educational technology association, not-for-profit. We bring in a lot of the different educational technology companies, some startups, some bigger publishers. We're about 50 right now. And we did this kind of because we thought it would be cool to kind of meet other people, but it actually turned into something a little bit better than that. Now we help directly with the Ministry of Education. We have a Slack channel, and we just have a question whenever they have a question for us. We dialogue with them directly. Another thing we do is we talk amongst ourselves. We solve like marketing problems together. People come in and have a monthly meeting, and we go through, how do you teach this authentication problem, or how do you sell to this type of school district? And we are really doing a great job of solving problems for everyone in our ecosystem. Granted, it's smaller because it's just one province, and there's some homogeneity in what we do. But one of the things I do think would be beneficial for what we're doing here is creating some kind of association that has this kind of back and forth. Because, for instance, I saw an amazing talk earlier from a designer. We need to get better design in one of our games. We need to reach out to that person. I'm going to do it. Hopefully that person will be back and we have that conversation. But it's something that is not easy to do, and it creates more barriers to what we're trying to do moving forward. So I do think that creating something where we would talk more frequently, and then also talk with decision makers more frequently and more easily would be beneficial to everyone in this space.
Yeah. I moved to Canada. Yeah. One more time.
Quick question. I'm from the education world, and I want to know how it is, and it's funny you talk about having sort of a platform where there can be this open discussion. What can be done to help educators think more like designers or developers to some extent? Because I feel like some of the problem I see with using like games based in education is that they don't know, a lot of times educators don't feel like they're equipped to ask the questions about what can be done to make something better. And I feel like at some point we're going to come to like this point of fruition where you'll have some ability for educators and service people that can participate in like an open source community the same way like, I mean, this is super tangential reference, but like when RPG Maker came out, it invited people that didn't necessarily have game programming skills to figure out how to assemble a narrative with like stock pieces. And I know that we're a ways off from that, but I feel like we're still sort of in this area of division between developers and educators, and some of the things that are more daunting as an educator is like, what do you do to help make whatever questions you have meaningful for the development community? And I want to know, like, sort of, what is like a quick, I mean, maybe there is none, but what is a quick and dirty way to help people in the education world think about, like, how to be
So I think you should come up and talk to these folks because they're going to have ideas for you. But I'm also getting the signal that we have to wrap up this room. So come down, come down. So I know we need like another 2 hours, but thank you, everybody. Thanks for bearing with us with a little bit of a by the seat of our pants thing going on up here. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Jane. And we're all around, so come talk to us. Thank you, everybody.